Hi, Thomas. Really good to see you again.
Hi Claire, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, have you had a good week?
Yeah, it's been okay. How's yours been?
Yeah, mine's been good. Bit of running, quite a lot of work, but that's been good. Work's good. What have you been doing that's been a bit different, Thomas?
I've been doing a course online about how to share the gospel with people.
Oh, so is that sort of like some helping you to think about how you can talk to people about Jesus?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Now, talking about sharing, Thomas, what happened to those donuts last week? Did you manage to share them with your housemates or did you eat them all yourself?
Oh well, you see, we dropped them on the floor by accident, so no one actually had them in the end.
Oh no, because they looked like yummy donuts, didn't they? Oh
Yeah.
dear. Well, I'm sorry for your housemates that they missed out. Um, Now, I've got a bit of a quiz for you today, Thomas. Let me just tell you a little bit about the quiz. So last week we left Joseph. Where was Joseph at the end of the last week?
I was in prison
Yeah, he was. And why was he in prison?
because he was in trouble for doing the right thing.
He was in trouble for doing the right thing. And it looked like a bit of an impossible situation, wasn't it? We weren't sure what was going to happen. So what I thought we'd do, we'd have a little quiz, and I've got some objects that you might use to help you get out of prison. I think most of these objects have been used by different people to get them out of prison, okay, at some time or other. So children, you can join in, have a look at the objects and see if you can work out how you would use it to get yourself out of prison if you were in prison. So I'm going to see if I can get the PowerPoint up now. I'm in prison. Get me out of here. Okay? So the first one, Thomas, is a rope. How would you use a rope to get yourself out of prison?
Hmm. Um, I guess you put the rope over the prison wall, and then you could climb up.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Children, I wonder if you've got any other ideas. A rope would be good. What about the next one? So this is like a small saw that perhaps you could get smuggled into the prison. What do you think you might do with that?
Well, it looks super sharp, so maybe you could cut your chains, or you could cut the bars if it's strong enough.
Yeah, it might take quite a long time, mightn't it? It might be quite slow. You perhaps have to do a little bit each day so nobody noticed. What about this one? This is a spade. I don't know how you get it into prison, but what might you do with a spade, do you think?
Hmm. Well, you could always dig underneath, and then you could end up outside of the prison if you make a tunnel.
Yeah, you could dig a tunnel. I think there's lots of people who've done that, who've slowly dug a tunnel and got themselves out of prison. What about this? Some glasses and a wig. How might you use that to get you out of prison?
This is a tough one. Maybe someone could put on the glasses and the hair, and they could pretend they're somebody else, and then maybe they would be let go.
Yeah, you could. You could pretend you were somebody else. Maybe the red nose might give it away a bit. But yeah, I think you're right. Some sort of disguise. You could get dressed up as somebody else and see if you could get out. What about this one? A helicopter.
Oh wow! Um, you could have one of your friends fly the helicopter over to the prison, and then they could help you escape.
Yep, yep. And that definitely happened. This is a true story. This is in France, I think, where a prisoner, managed to get some of his friends to hijack a helicopter, and it landed in the prison, and then he managed to escape. And this is obviously, he's then run off, and this is where the police trying to work out where he is. I think they did catch him again in the end. Now, the last one is a jar of peanut butter. How would you use a jar of peanut butter to get out of prison? You haven't got a clue, have
Oh,
you, Thomas?
I don't. I really have no idea. I don't know how you'd use peanut butter to escape jail.
Well, I don't know, children, whether you've got any other ideas. You might have some ideas. This is also a true story. There were some prisoners in America, and what they did was they got the peanut butter out of their sandwiches that they ate each day in the prison, and they used the peanut butter to make like a dough. And then there was a door in the prison that was an exit door, and it didn't have a number on it. So what they did is they used the peanut butter dough to make a number, and they stuck it on the door. And then they managed to persuade one of the prison guards, who was quite new, to open the door for him. And they said, "This is our cell." But of course, it wasn't their cell. It got them out of the prison. So yeah, if you ever want to get out of prison, that might be another way to do it. Right, let me just turn the PowerPoint off. There we are. So, Thomas, do you think Joseph might need to use any of those to get himself out of prison?
Oh, I don't know. He might need some help, but I think God might help him to get out of jail.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Some of those probably wouldn't be very useful for Joseph. Definitely helicopters. I don't think helicopters were around. Peanut butter, maybe not. Yeah, children, what we're going to find out today is we're going to find out actually how God managed to get him out of prison. God didn't need to use any of those means, but God worked in such a way that Joseph was got out of prison exactly the right time. So I'm going to tell you the story about how God did that. So you need to sort of listen carefully and work out how it was that God actually got Joseph out of prison. And then I think we might be coming back to Thomas after that. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, a little bit from Thomas, and then I'll be back at the end. So Thomas has got a little surprise for us a bit later on, and then I'll be back at the end to help us to think through what today's Bible story about Joseph teaches us about God and what difference that makes for us. So I'll see you all in a bit, and you'll see Thomas later. Bye.
Bye.
So Joseph was in prison. He'd ended up in prison, hadn't he? Even though he'd done the right thing in a really difficult situation. But then time went on, and Joseph was still in prison. What had happened to God's promises to Joseph? When was God going to keep his promises? How much longer was Joseph going to have to wait? Can you remember what it was that God had promised Joseph? Yes, God had promised that one day he would be a ruler and that all his family would bow down to him. But with Joseph stuck in prison, how likely was it that God's promise was going to come true? You see, Joseph had hoped that, well, there was another man in the prison with him. He was Pharaoh's cupbearer. And Joseph was hoping that he would have been able to help him. After all, with God's help, Joseph had been able to tell him all about what his dream meant. And just as God has said, the cupbearer had got his old job back and had returned to work in Pharaoh's palace. But sadly, he'd forgotten all about Joseph. And in fact, 2 long years had gone by since he'd asked the cupbearer to remember him. 2 long years, but the cupbearer had just forgotten all about Joseph, and Joseph was still in prison. Would God keep his promise? How was God going to keep his promise? How much longer was Joseph going to have to wait? Well, one night, Pharaoh had some terrible dreams that were really disturbing, dreams that he just couldn't get out of his head when he woke up the next morning. Those dreams must mean something, he thought to himself. And so the first thing he did was send for his magicians and wise men. "You've got to tell me," he said, "what these dreams mean." But none of them could tell him. And then Pharaoh's cupbearer remembered Joseph. "Your Majesty, please forgive me. I think I should have told you this earlier. When you had the baker and me thrown into prison, there was a Hebrew slave there. We had strange dreams too, and this Hebrew slave told us all about what our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he said he would. I was given my old job back, but the baker was put to death. Bring me this Hebrew slave, said Pharaoh. So Joseph was fetched from prison. He was allowed to shower and shave and given some new clothes to wear. And he was brought before Pharaoh. I hear that you can tell what dreams mean, said Pharaoh. No, said Joseph, I can't tell you what dreams mean, but God can. Tell me your dreams. And so Pharaoh told him all about those disturbing dreams that he'd had. In my dream, said Pharaoh, I was standing by the Nile River, and out of the river came 7 fat cows, and they began to eat up all the grass at the edge of the river. But then out of the river came 7 really skinny cows. And these cows were ugly and skinny and thin, and they began to eat up the fat cows. But actually you couldn't tell that he'd eaten them because they still looked skinny and ugly. And then I had another dream. And in this dream, there were 7 fat ears of corn. And then 7 skinny and ugly ears of corn. And they ate up the 7 good fat ears of corn. When Pharaoh had finished, Joseph said, both your dreams mean the same thing. God is telling you what he's going to do. The 7 fat cows and the 7 good ears of corn stand for 7 good years. In the next 7 years, there are going to be lots of rain and sun. The crops will grow and there will be food enough for everyone in Egypt. But the 7 skinny and ugly cows and the 7 thin and ugly ears of corn stand for 7 years of a great famine. There will be no rain. All the crops will wither and die, and people will cry out for food. It will be absolutely terrible. Joseph continued and said, this is what God is going to do. God gave you 2 dreams because God wants you to know that this is definitely going to happen. And God will make it happen soon. What you need to do is you need to choose a wise man and put him in charge over all of Egypt. His job will be to make sure that over the next 7 years, enough food is stored away and saved for later, so that when the 7 years of famine happen, there will be food enough to eat. Then the people of Egypt will be rescued from death and kept safe. There will be enough food for them to eat. Pharaoh listened to all that Joseph told him, and then he said, where in Egypt could I find a wiser man than you? Surely the Spirit of God is with you. I'm going to put you in charge over all of Egypt. Whatever you command, it will be done. So he took the ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's hand. This ring had on it a special seal, the seal of Pharaoh's authority. Only Pharaoh was more important than Joseph in the land of Egypt. Then he had Joseph put in the best royal robes and a gold chain around his neck. How things had changed for Joseph. Before, he'd been in prison. Now he had one of the most important jobs in the whole of Egypt. Who could make that happen? God. God had been powerfully at work in everything that had happened. Who had given Pharaoh's cupbearers those dreams? God. Who had made sure that the dreams came true? God. Who had given the dreams to Pharaoh? God. Who had made Pharaoh's cupbearer remember Joseph? God. Who had given Joseph the meaning of the dreams? God. And who had made Pharaoh choose Joseph to be in charge of everything in Egypt? God. God had kept his promise to Joseph. He was now a very important man, a ruler over a whole nation. But it had taken a long, long time and a lot of waiting for Joseph. I wonder if Thomas is any good at waiting. Let's watch and find out.
Every day we have to wait for lots of things. We wait for a bus to come, for birthday cards to come, or for dinner to be ready. Or even for church service to start on Sunday mornings. Sometimes we just don't know how long we have to wait. Joseph had to wait a long time for God to keep his promises. I wonder if he ever found it hard to wait for so long.
I'm going to ask you all a question. How good are you at waiting for things? I wonder how good you are. Sometimes it can be really hard, can't it, to wait for things? And it's much harder when we don't know when something is going to happen. When will dinner be ready? When is the bus going to arrive? I've been waiting here for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes already. When am I going to get my new bike? When can we go on holiday? And the longer you have to wait, the harder it is. This is Joseph in prison. How long did he have to wait in prison? He'd waited for 2 years, 2 years after he'd said to Pharaoh's cupbearer, please remember me. But it had been 2 years until Pharaoh's cupbearer remembered him and he was able to get out of prison. But actually, Joseph had been waiting much longer than that. God had made him a promise a long, long time before that, a promise that one day God would make him a ruler over his family. Well, Joseph wasn't a ruler over his family yet, but he's certainly a ruler over everyone in Egypt. He's got a very important job. God has kept his promise, but Joseph has had to wait patiently for a very long time. Let's see if we can work out how long Joseph had to wait. So the Bible says that when he was made a ruler in Egypt, he was 30 years old. And the Bible also tells us in Genesis chapter 37 that he was 17 when God first made that promise to him. So 30 minus 17, are you able to work it out? Perhaps a grown-up might be able to help you. So 30 minus 17 is 13 years. He'd waited 13 years for God to keep his promise. Now, 13 years, that's quite a long time. We're in 2020, aren't we? And 13 years ago from today would be 2007. I wonder, were any of you alive in 2007? I don't think so. 2007 was before you were born, so that's a long, long time ago. Joseph had waited 13 years, but he was able to wait patiently because he knew that God was in control. God was in charge of everything that happened to him. God was in charge of all those dreams. God made sure that Pharaoh's cupbearer remembered him at just the right time. God made sure that Pharaoh made him ruler over everyone in Egypt. So Joseph was able to wait patiently because he trusted that God would keep his promises, because God was in control of everything that happened. Now, what about us? I think sometimes we find it hard to wait for God to keep his promises. God has given us lots and lots of promises, and some of them are really big and amazing promises. So God has promised that one day we will see Jesus as King, that Jesus will come back and he will bring a new world, a perfect world, where there's no sadness and no badness and no illness. But we just don't know how long we'll have to wait. And sometimes it's really hard to wait when bad things happen to us or when sad things happen to us. And God has promised that he will answer our prayers when we talk to him. But sometimes we have to wait a long time. Sometimes we don't know how God is going to answer our prayers. And the longer we wait, sometimes the harder it can be. But you know, when we are finding it hard to wait for God to keep his promise to us, perhaps when hard and sad and bad things happen, we can remind ourselves of today's story, remind ourselves about what God did for Joseph, because God is just the same. God doesn't change. God is still in control. God still keeps his promises. And we can pray and we can ask God to help us to keep on waiting patiently. As we wait for him to keep his promises to us, we don't know how long it will be, but we can trust that he will. Well, it's been great to be with you again. And as usual, there will be some craft activities for you to do. There's a game to play, and maybe some things to talk about as a family and some things to pray for as a family as you help each other to keep on trusting God as you wait for him to keep your promises. I'll be back again next week and looking forward to seeing you then.